All righty, everyone. With that, let's get started. Just again, as folks are joining us, encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. Well, welcome everyone to our Preservation Next Colorado Academy session focused on the engagement of community land trusts and small to medium multifamily preservation in Colorado. This will include an overview of the CLT model and some case studies and examples from Colorado as well as other markets. So really excited to dig into this topic with everyone today. My name is Sarah Haas. I'm a Senior Director of Preservation Next here at Enterprise, and excited to be with you. Just a few quick housekeeping items. We are recording this session, and we'll share the recording and slides after the fact. Please use the chat for your questions throughout. We'll review those throughout the session and offer an opportunity to share those questions with our panelists during the Q&A portion. You'll also have the opportunity to jump off mute and ask questions directly if you're interested. Just during the session, though, ask that you keep yourselves on mute while not speaking. All right, I'm just going to take a quick review of our agenda now. So I'll kick us off with a quick overview of Preservation Next. I will then pass to James Yellen, Enterprise, who's going to provide a bit of an overview and introduction to community land trusts and community ownership in our work at Enterprise. And then we're going to hear from our partners in the field. First from two of our Colorado partners who will share a case study of a CLT partnership they have in Denver. And then we'll hear from a partner from another market. We'll hear from Adam Maloon, the Douglas Community Land Trust, about their work. We'll then have the opportunity to bring everyone back together for Q&A. So again, pop your questions in that chat throughout and prepare yourself to answer any questions live that you wish. And then we'll give a bit of a sneak peek to our next session. We are, of course, nearing the end of our Academy sessions, which is kind of crazy to think about. All right, next, I just want to give a big thank you to our funders, without whom this work would not happen. First, a big thank you to Mackenzie Scott, Kaiser Permanente, CIT, the Colorado Health Foundation, JP Morgan Chase, and Cary Community Ventures for their support, as well as the additional funders noted here. Just to give a quick overview of Preservation Next, most folks have probably joined us before. Preservation Next is the national enterprise program focused on catalyzing and supporting local small to medium multifamily preservation and housing stability efforts across the country. We're focused on the small to medium multifamily stock, which for us is properties under 100 units, though we have a real focus on 50 units and under, which we know are a critical source of affordable housing for low and moderate income households. And we know they're actually providing the majority of affordable homes in our communities, but there really aren't scaled solutions to preserve this stock, and they're not typically protected by a public subsidy or other affordability restriction. With Preservation Next, we're really focused on not only the preservation of the building stock, but also on the housing stability of the residents who live in these properties. Preservation Next has been developed by a team across all enterprise divisions with input from local partners in our markets. I lead this work along with Megan Volkovic as our senior advisor, and Jesse Wang, our preservation fellow, who many of you have spoken with. And then leading our Colorado Preservation Next work, we're partnered with Jenny Rogers and Christy Smith. So just quickly want to highlight our past and upcoming sessions. You see we're nearing the end of our series. We're going to pop the link in the chat so that you can access the recordings of those past sessions and register for the last couple. Encourage folks to check those out. This is also where we will post today's recording and slides. So I am now going to pass to James Yellen to kick us off with a bit of an introduction and foundation of our community land trust work at Enterprise. James is a senior director with Enterprise's National Upward Mobility team. He formerly led preservation work in our Northern California office, and so really brings those two bodies of work together. He focuses on the role that community wealth building and inclusive capital strategies can play in advancing economic opportunity, resident power building, and a sense of belonging for the variety of communities Enterprise works with. So really excited to have James's partnership in this work. And with that, James, I'm going to kick off to you, and I'm going to spotlight you in just a moment.
Thank you, Sarah. So my pleasure to be here and honored to be spotlit. So as Sarah said, I'm part of Enterprise's National Upward Mobility team. I do a lot of work with community land trusts nationally, as well as other forms of community ownership, because we, see these models as integral to upward mobility through the lens that we use here. So as we start to dive into community land trusts in today's session and how they intersect with housing preservation, I wanted to acknowledge this really exciting way in which preservation and anti-displacement and land trust and other forms of resident ownership or community ownership kind of all come together. So of course, Enterprise is primarily an affordable housing organization. So our work in upward mobility is about seeing how housing is more than just shelter, but it's a key contributor to mobility. The three core principles outlined in the diagram on the left in particular, namely economic success, being valued in community, and of course, power and autonomy. The diagram on the right illustrates the five components of the housing bundle, as we call it. These are the five attributes of housing that are necessary to really promote upward mobility, which includes stability, housing quality, housing affordability, a sense of neighborhood context and integrating neighborhood context into the housing that's provided, and housing that builds assets and wealth. And I think for those that aren't familiar with land trusts, you'll see how the model sort of bakes in all components of this, depending on the how it's implemented. All five of these components of the housing bundle sort of come through. We can go to the next slide. So I will say that, this session isn't meant to be a 101 on community land trusts. There's a lot of great content out there from grassroots organizations, other community land trusts, Grounded Solutions Network, folks that specialize in land trusts and provide a lot of great information on how they work and all the technical details. But we do have time to go into some of the basics just for those that might not have a prior familiarity. On the left, you'll see sort of the five main pillars of community land trusts, and particularly how they represent an intersection of preservation, upward mobility. And I'll walk through those really briefly. I think the graphic on the right, which I've borrowed from the organization Oakland Community Land Trust, based in Oakland, California, where we've done a lot of work, really does a nice job of just simply illustrating the relationship between the trust, the organization that's owning and stewarding the land, the ground lease, which is the main mechanism for ensuring that permanent affordability, and then the improvements or structures that are built on top of the land. So that sort of helps us understand that first bullet about permanently affordable land stewardship. The 99-year ground lease model is historically the primary way that that's achieved. Land trusts are also known for their collective governance and community control in many applications. The most common way that is achieved is through what's called the tripartite board structure. This is sort of the classic CLT board, where 1/3 of the board members are residents, another third are local community members that do not reside on the CLT land, and then the final third are public representatives that may include local funders, nonprofit housing providers, social service providers, in some cases public officials, and they work together to steward the CLT properties and keep the direction of the land trust moving in accordance with the mission. That next bullet, opportunity for resident ownership and wealth building. So in some cases, you'll see land trusts using this split ownership model, which separates the land from the improvements to allow residents, or in some cases even businesses, depending on what is being stewarded on that land, to own the structures, own where they live, own where they operate, and control, how those homes or those businesses or those other structures are managed. That could be through a single family home. It could be a share in a housing cooperative. It could be a resale restricted condo. It could be, in some cases, like I said, commercial buildings. There are some examples of that. The next bullet just illustrates just how many different land uses or property types rather can be stewarded through the community land trust. It's exciting in part because it's such a flexible model. So today we're talking about preservation of existing residential structures. That's just one of the ways that they can be applied. Land trusts have been used to steward green space in urban environments, urban gardens, urban agriculture, other sorts of community facilities, all of which can be part of the land trust, be part of the community that they are supporting, and have that stability of tenure, have that stability of remaining affordable through the 99-year ground lease. And I also just want to acknowledge, we tend to think of housing as a binary between renting and owning, but there are in fact many different models of housing that exist within that spectrum between renting and owning. And land trusts are one of the ways that those different models can be supported. So I already mentioned condos and co-ops and deed restricted single family or resale restricted single family homes. There are others out there, a lot of creative options and innovations coming in the field to balance the responsibilities and the opportunities that comes with different forms of resident ownership or community ownership. We can go to the next slide. So this is just a quick summary of some of the work that Enterprise has been doing as it relates to community land trusts. We don't have a national community land trust program per se, but we have supported land trusts and continue to work with land trusts across many of our national programs, as well as in some of the cities that we're currently working. So here's just a handful of those. Some might be familiar with SPARK, the Strong, Prosperous, and Resilient Communities Challenge. Denver was actually one of the 6 cities that participated in SPARK, where we provided grants, loans, research support, technical assistance to a lot of folks that were exploring models of community ownership, and in some cases, community land trusts. And I don't have to go through every single bullet here, but just a couple of the more recent exciting opportunities we're currently working on in the realm of community land trusts. We're building on some really fun and now it's been several years of working with community land trust in New York, which has been really exciting and focusing mostly on policy and bringing land trust to the public discourse and helping support political wins there. The fun part is now digging more into the real estate development, kind of like we're doing with Preservation Next and this Preservation Academy in New York. We're about to launch a 12-part real estate training series geared specifically to the needs of CLTs. And yeah, I don't want to take up too much more time. I want to get to our presenters, but just giving you a sense of where Enterprise is currently at with supporting land trust. It's an area that we find really exciting, and we are continuing to do more work in this space. So for anyone that's interested in figuring out how to partner with us in support of this model or other community ownership models, feel free to reach out. Always happy to have a conversation and figure out ways that we can help advance the work. We can go to the next slide. And this is just a recap. I don't expect people to be able to read all of this tiny text, but an example of the many different CLTs that we supported through Spark in places as disparate as Chicago and Atlanta and Los Angeles, the Bay Area, through a variety of tools, all in the hopes of helping these organizations acquire, in this case, small residential properties, do the necessary capital improvements, work with residents to figure out the best model for them to continue staying in their homes, whether it's continuing as renters or transitioning to owners, and maintaining that affordability indefinitely. So I will now hand it off to our speakers. We have a really exciting set of panelists today, and one of the great things about who we're going to hear from is that they're going to be talking about lots of different ways that land trusts have been used to support affordable housing, and in particular, housing preservation, some of which lean more on the traditional sort of community owned or community controlled model of the CLT. We're going to hear a little bit more about that from the Douglas Community Land Trust in DC. But our first speakers are going to be talking more about how elements of this model can be used in development partnerships for other forms of affordable housing and preservation, while using the core tools of the land trust ownership, the split title, the 99-year ground lease, the ability to remove land from the development sort of costs as they're considered. We're going to be hearing a really exciting example of that locally in Colorado. So our first speaker, I believe it's our first speaker, is going to be taking the mic shortly, is Aaron Martinez. He's the Chief Operating Officer at the Urban Land Conservancy. He oversees Urban Land Conservancy's day-to-day operations and supervises the management of the organization's assets. Anna is the Director of Real Estate at ULC, where she provides technical research and other forms of support and project management expertise to ensure that all the projects are completed in alignment with ULC's goals and community needs. As part of the overview of the project that ULC is going to be talking about today, we're going to turn it over to Sarah and Hannah at Archway Communities, who'll speak more about the development plan for Mosaic Community Campus. Sarah is the Senior Development Manager at Archway Communities, where she works to execute Archway's real estate strategy. Prior to Archway, Sarah provided technical assistance to developers and underwrote applications for affordable housing projects across Colorado. Hannah is the Housing Development Manager at Archway Communities, where she works with the real estate team to manage current and ongoing projects. She is also working closely with the Director of Real Estate on new opportunities to advance the Archway's mission. And finally, as I mentioned, we're going to be hearing from folks, or at least Adam from Douglas Community Land Trust in Washington, D.C. Adam serves as the Director of Stewardship there, facilitating the work of maintaining permanently affordable housing from generation to generation. Prior to Douglas, he served as the Vice President of Affordable Housing at City First Homes, where Douglas CLT was actually incubated. So in this role, he's contributing to the development of Douglas CLT as a community-led organization that manages and stewards a wide variety of housing types, including housing co-ops, rentals, and other forms of housing. So we'll be hearing from all of these folks in just a second, and I will now hand it off to Aaron to kick us off.
Thanks, James. Get the presentation going here. There we go. Well, hi, everybody.
Aaron, we're saving your notes instead of your slides.
Oh, well, let's stop that.
Now they know what you're going to say.
How's that look? All right, great. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Martinez. As James said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Urban Land Conservancy. And first off, I just wanted to give you an overview of Urban Land Conservancy, who we are, and how we approach the Community Land Trust. So first off, oh, I lost my tools here. One second. First off, ULC's mission, we exist to preserve, develop, and steward permanently affordable real estate to positively impact lives and communities in Colorado. What does that mean? We are trying to disrupt market forces to preserve affordability for both for uses like affordable housing, for affordable office space for nonprofits, and other community beneficial uses. We've got some projects that include charter schools, a dual generation high school where young parents and their kids go to the same school, and boys and girls clubs and things like that. Our approach to the Community Land Trust is really what I like to call a commercial community land trust. You know, we don't have single family homes in our portfolio. We have commercial properties that either have excess land that are ideal for housing development, or nonprofit facilities that multiple nonprofits occupy together to make the best use of that space and to make it affordable for them. And so, like I said, one of our key tactics is to disrupt those market forces and to preserve, especially in neighborhoods that are undergoing displacement and gentrification. We try to get in early and preserve that real estate for community beneficial use. In doing that, we really work to leverage our organizational values in these projects. Our stated values, we just went through a strategic planning process where we really re-upped and clarified what the organization is about. And that includes anti-racism, it includes environmental sustainability, real estate stewardship, collective impact, and innovation, really identifying novel solutions to affordability crises like we see in Colorado. And then also we're definitely focused on ensuring long-term affordability. We'll talk a little bit in a second about our 99-year land lease and you know what we put into those agreements to ensure that the investments that we're making today are going to be a benefit to the community for the long term. Just give you an example of some of other ULC's projects. Let me just back up one slide. I think I jumped into Anna's slide. Our partnerships, we partner with about 80 different nonprofits across the Denver metro area to provide them with affordable office space for their operations, warehousing space, meeting space, helping those nonprofits be close to the communities and the populations that they serve. We also help nonprofits step into ownership of their buildings. So there's a couple of organizations that when things have lined up right, we're able to identify a building that works for them, that we can put our resources together to do the acquisition, and they can either lease back from us until they're at a point where they can buy the improvements, or maybe if they're ready to go, then we've done projects where those nonprofits will buy the building directly from us at closing, and we'll maintain ownership of the land to, again, ensure long-term affordability and community beneficial use. Oh, my headphone's dying. Sorry, folks. Technical issues today. Hold on, let me turn this off. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. We act as a land bank in many ways. We partner with developers to build, and usually we retain the land in the CLT, but developers to build affordable housing projects. A lot of times that includes LIHTC developments for rental housing. Like I mentioned, we have a Boys and Girls Club. We've also incubated and spun off an organization called Elevation Community Land Trust that does do more of that single family, small multifamily, shared equity housing products. And then there are occasions where we will act as the developer. We've got a couple of projects going right now where, for whatever reason, one way or another, development partners have not been able to make a go of a certain site, and so we we're doing the vertical development there. Still a partnership. We still pull a lot of mission-aligned people together to do those projects, including a lot of community engagement and community representation. And then finally, what Urban Land Conservancy, what we do, we really try our best to share what works well for us, to share our successes, our challenges, the skill, the products that we've developed. We provide technical assistance to organizations that are looking to replicate projects like ours. We work with other nonprofits and their communities to put some of these deals together as well. So that's ULC in a nutshell. We're pretty non-traditional. We probably have one of the largest portfolios of land that we consider in a commercial community land trust in the country. And again, it's all about long-term affordability. It's about access. It's about helping nonprofits be in the communities that they're serving, and preserving that land. So I'll go ahead and hand over the next bit to Anna.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Mercurio. I'm the Director of Real Estate for Urban Land Conservancy. And I'm going to kick us off talking about the kind of case study here, which is Mosaic Community Campus. Got a nice image of one of the historically preserved buildings there on the campus. I think we can go to the next screen, Aaron. Or next slide. Thank you. So an overview of the project and an aerial image of the project. You can see the red outline there. Mosaic Community Campus is approximately 25 acres in size. There are 13 buildings on the property. It's located in the South Park Hill neighborhood, which is neighboring the East Colfax neighborhood. And as you can kind of tell there, it's largely surrounded by single family homes. As you might expect from a campus, some of the buildings are set up with classrooms. There's a gymnasium, a cafeteria. There are also 10 commercial kitchens in one of the buildings. There's a chapel, an outdoor amphitheater, some open space in the quad area, and several dormitories, 4 of which are currently being renovated into affordable housing, which we will hear about in a few minutes from Archway Communities. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about the history of the property a little bit and also kind of the acquisition story. So the property has a long history. It was inhabited by the Arapaho tribe initially, and in 1890, the Colorado Women's College was established there. Over the next several decades, 10 buildings were built on the property. And in 1981, the Colorado Women's College was built on the campus. And, well, took over the campus, I guess I should say. I'm sorry, in 1981, they merged with the University of Denver, and DU continued to utilize the campus until 2000. In 2000, that's when Johnson & Wales University purchased the campus. Some of you may be familiar with Johnson & Wales. They're especially known for providing culinary arts and hospitality education, which explains the 10 commercial kitchens in the culinary arts building that I mentioned before. So as far as the acquisition story is concerned, the new vision for the campus really came from Dr. Anthony McWright, who is the executive principal of the Denver School of Arts, which also has a location directly north of this property. When he learned of the pending sale by Johnson & Wales University in 2020, he reached out to both the Denver Housing Authority and ULC to talk about how we could preserve the campus. So we went into conversations about purchasing the campus. We competed against 9 other market rate developers, and we were eventually selected. The purchase price was $61.5 million, which was actually discounted below market rate. So Denver Public Schools and Denver Housing Authority ended up being our acquisition partners. DPS purchased what we refer to as the West Campus, and DHA purchased the South Campus. And there's a few reasons that this deal, that we were able to make it work. One of those was our strong partnerships in the community. That's critical to what we were able to do here. Another one was a very quick timeline for the deal. We were able to close in less than 120 days from the point that we went under contract. And for a project of this size, that was very fast. And the third one, if you want to switch to the next slide here, Aaron, had to do with our dedicated source of funding. It's the Metro Denver Impact Facility. We call it MDIF. So this provides private capital with First Bank as the lead and other local foundations that provide program-related investments, as well as funding from the CHAFA, Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. So for this particular deal, we had 8 different sources of debt to purchase the campus, all of which were under MDIF. And in general, MDIF is quick to deploy. It allows us to be flexible. We have below market blended rate. It's patient 10-year money. And it really highlights the public-private partnership and with an overall focus on impact. Aaron, I'm going to switch it back over to you to talk about campus activation.
Yeah, great, thanks. One other thing I want to say about MDIF, though, something that's super important there is we've got all of these funding sources. We've got a local bank, or a regional bank, I should say. We've got foundations, we've got the state, but all of those myriad funding sources defer to First Bank, that regional bank, and their underwriting. So that's the way we're able to use this so quickly. Also, all of our projects that use MDIF satisfy First Bank's CRA obligations. And so it's just a really, really effective tool that we've put together. We could spend a whole session just on MDIF, but that's really what made this possible, made the quick close possible. And we beat out market rate developers and got it below market rate only because we were able to close so quickly. So really important tool there. But what I want to talk about now is the activation of the campus. So we bought this 23 acre, $62 million campus. What are we going to do with it? It's a university. It's ULC's biggest acquisition to date. And so probably at least as impressive as just making the deal happen was how quickly and effectively the partners came together to put this asset back into use for the community. There was a diverse group of community stakeholders that came together to provide input. We all really agreed that we wanted this campus to be open, to be connected, to really, if you're in Denver or know much about this area of Denver, to be a connector and a bridge between South Park Hill and East Colfax neighborhoods. Two very different neighborhoods. They've experienced displacement, gentrification in different ways and on different timelines. But the area median income of South Park Hill is more than double what it is just across Quebec Street in East Colfax. And so East Colfax neighborhood is a specific target area of impact and investment for ULC. So even though this campus sits in South Park Hill, is right on the border of East Colfax. And so for us, this is a key bridge property to connect those two neighborhoods. And then also the vision of the campus is for all of its diversity of both the users of the campus, but also a diversity of use. And we'll go into that in a minute, of all the different and exciting things that are happening there. So you can read the vision that we came up with for the campus. And the goal here, again, in all of our work, is to make these efforts and these investments last for the long term. So how are we going to maintain this vision? And really, we do this by two things. One is engaging with the community, making sure that the community, the neighborhood, the people that are invested in this area are on board, are at the table, and they have a voice in what's happening on the campus. So from the get-go, when we closed on the campus, we had to debrand. We had to get all of Johnson & Wales plaques and signs and names. That was something we were required to do by the agreement. But we engaged the public to talk about, okay, what are we going to call this thing? It's been, Johnson & Wales campus for 20 years, or Johnson & Wales University for 20 years. So we went through about an 8-month process with a big group of stakeholders. We solicited the public. They submitted about 120 names that the committee reviewed, and we talked about history, and we talked about appropriateness, and we talked about, what would be really a fitting name for the campus. And as you can see with the name and all the branding that we have, it's Mosaic came to the forefront as something that really exemplified that diversity of use and users on the campus. So that was one of the community engagement processes. The other one was sparked by some rezoning and an LDR, a large development review framework that we had to go through to allow some of the uses that I'll talk about in a minute. So slight adjustment, but that LDR process is really, it's big, but it also mandates meeting with the neighborhood and bringing people into a room and talking about what our plans were for the campus. And it was a very engaging and I think really successful process of engaging the community and the neighborhood. And then the third thing that we did is something that I think is important, something visual, something concrete and tangible to kind of pivot from what the campus was into what the campus is becoming. And so we engaged a local arts nonprofit called Platform, and they worked with students from one of the schools on the campus and Denver School of the Arts, which is just across the street to the north. to design and build and install a sculpture in the center of the quad. It's a movable, sort of mobile, moves in the wind sculpture that has input from the students that use this campus. I think we have a picture of it here in a minute. It's very cool, but it's sort of one of those pieces that just kind of shows the pivot from what it was to what it is becoming. And so, like I said, maintaining this vision requires two things, or at least in this case, two things. It was really deep engagement. And then the other one is just like with lots of relationships, negotiations, very detailed legal contracts and agreements. So we bought this campus in partnership with Denver Housing Authority and Denver Public Schools. So those are two very large quasi-governmental organizations that have lots of bureaucracy, that have all of their own motivations and needs and desires for what they need out of their buildings, but we wanted to maintain this collaborative open campus. Not to say anything negative about Denver Public Schools, but just in other cases where they have a school campus that abuts publicly accessible land, in every case a fence goes up. And if that would have happened on this campus, there would have been a fence right down the middle of the campus dividing the east and west sides. I understand, and obviously everybody has an appreciation for security and protection at schools, but we just really didn't want that to be the case here, at least not that visual of a fence dividing this campus. So we worked really hard, probably 10 times longer than the purchase and sale agreement to buy the campus, 10 times longer it took to develop a master declaration, an owners association, and agreements of how all the landowners were going to cooperate in keeping this vision in the campus. There are a couple of things that we had to agree on. One, there's common space in the middle that ULC owns but is open to all users. We had to regulate and manage the use of that space. There is a district heating loop. So there's boilers that serve multiple buildings that are owned by different people. The loop runs through different owners' land. I mean, just very, adds a lot of complication to these agreements. And then just use of the space, common area maintenance, all of that stuff. So we have an owners association that ULC is represented, Denver Public Schools and Denver Housing Authority is represented in that owners association. And then we have a management firm to manage that process. Here's a list of all the partners right now. And actually there's a whole sub list of organizations that use the campus under some of these groups. And like I said, a real diversity of uses and users on the campus. There's education. St. Elizabeth School is a school that provides K through 8 education, sliding scale tuition, diverse student body. There's Denver School of the Arts that will be expanding onto the East Campus into some of the academic buildings there. And then also we've got Emily Griffith Technical College that provides technical training. It also works with refugee and immigrant populations to do English as a second language and job skills training work. Lots of great education opportunities happening on the campus. There's workforce development. Anna mentioned 10 commercial kitchens. This is probably what I always point back to as the biggest success, or one of the largest success points of this project. Each of these kitchens to build out today would cost about $1 million each of the space, of the FF&E, of all of it takes to set up. You know, this probably, had it gone to the private market, I don't know how easily there would have been a user to find for this building in particular. But within just a couple of months, we had Kitchen Network, which is a local nonprofit that focuses on developing small food-based businesses, food trucks, commissary kitchens, stuff like that, put these kitchens right back to work. The deal included all the FF&E in these kitchens, so the ovens, the walk-ins, the pots and pans, the knives, the the prep tables, the cutting boards, all of that was included and immediately went right back into use by Kitchen Network. So they provide a lot of workforce development opportunities and skills training. One of their subtenants is Work Options, who works with previously incarcerated individuals to gain job skills to work in the food service industry. And then another point of activation on the campus is obviously housing. And I'll let Archway get into the details here, but 4 dorm buildings with 400 dorm rooms are currently underway and being renovated into affordable family rental housing. Yeah, so really exciting. Again, this example is our commercial bent on a community land trust. The land that ULC owns under all of the buildings on the East Campus will be maintained in our land trust with long-term 99-year land leases, and the improvements. Both St. Elizabeth School and Kitchen Network have an option right now to buy their buildings in place. So that's how we put in the things to maintain that long-term affordability and community beneficial uses. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Archway now.
Thanks, Erin. Do you mind stop sharing so I can share my screen? Thank you so much. Okay, great. Can everyone see my screen? Am I sharing my notes? Cool.
Nope, you're good. You're good.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. We're so excited to be here and share our ground lease land trust journey with everyone. Just as a quick intro, Sarah and I are from Archway Communities. We are a nonprofit affordable housing developer in the Denver metro area. We are also a property management and supportive services provider. So we kind of handle everything in-house. It's a really great integration to make sure that we're building our developments that, manage really well and provide the services that our residents need. Here is a little bit of an overview of our footprint in Colorado. As you can see, we're very much on the Front Range, but ever growing. And now let's dive into Mosaic Community Campus. Erin, thank you for that intro. Our project is 4 historic dorm buildings, Johnson Wales founders and presidents, if that means anything to anyone. This was originally the Colorado Women's College and will inevitably be 154 affordable housing units. Like many things in this industry, in this world, we came into this partnership by luck and timing. Our respective CEOs were talking about a completely separate, unrelated deal, and they basically got connected about Mosaic Community Campus and the opportunity here. This was in June of 2021. Our team put together a tax credit application in no less than 6 weeks for August 2021. And we are super lucky. We got awarded in November. And to echo kind of Anna and Erin's comment about having amazing partnerships, that's exactly what this is. We would not be here without the amazing partnerships that we have. We're so lucky to be connected to the broader campus, and some fun surprises along the way, as with any rehab project. One really amazing story that Sarah and I love to tell anyone who will listen to us is we went through an investigative demolition back in the summer, and the one bathroom that we demolished in one of the buildings was the only one that didn't have mold in it, and the rest of the building was filled with mold. So that is a really fun rehab horror story that I'm sure everyone can resonate with who's been through a rehab project. But I say all of that to say that it's really worth it. This project really leans into ULC's vision of having a campus that is connected to the broader community. Kitchen Network and St. Elizabeth School are literally steps away from these buildings. These kinds of amenities are not usually available to the affordable housing world. And we're so excited and lucky to be part of this campus. And I'll hand it over to Sarah to walk through our capital stack a bit.
Great, thank you, Hannah, and thanks everyone for having us today. Yes, as Hannah mentioned, we were awarded in the first round with CHAFA here in Colorado, and we're really excited and moved as quickly as we could to close this transaction in December, literally at the last possible minute in the calendar year of 2022, down to the wire. And this is a snapshot of the sources in the deal. This is about a $67 million project for our 4 buildings. And we've combined every kind of tax credit we could. This audience is familiar, but there's a Colorado state affordable housing tax credit that's paired with the 4% tax credit. It's a competitive round in August every year. So that was the housing tax credit side. And as you could see, these are beautiful historic buildings dating back to the early 1900s and mid 1900s. So we were able to leverage over $10 million in federal and state historic tax credits. It was a new process for Hannah and I working through the historic tax credit piece, and learned so much about that as well. And it's a hugely beneficial source to have for these historic buildings. We also had wonderful state and local funding. We were trying to close in a time period with rapidly rising interest rates, as everyone knows, late last year and continuing on. So we had additional supplemental funding come in the 11th hour from the state, which was extremely helpful to get us to closing. CHAFA has provided the prep activity bonds for the project, and we deferred about 50% of our developer fee to close the gap. Important partners on the screen here. Hudson Housing is our investor. They bought all of the tax credits, including the state, affordable and historic. This was their first deal in Colorado, and they're really working. I think they have a few more now, so they've been actively engaging in the Colorado market. And Boston Capital is our construction and permanent lender, and they were an incredible partner as well. Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide. Great. So we're here, talking about the community land trust model, and this is, just from Archway's perspective, how we can share some benefits and challenges that we've been through and are currently working through. I guess on the benefits side, with this project would not have been feasible without this ground lease structure. This project is, as Aaron and Anna pointed out, in an incredible location in the city of Denver, a city that's become extremely expensive to find any affordable opportunities for developing affordable housing. So, essentially, I think this audience is well aware that land costs are not basis eligible for tax credits. So structuring a project with a land lease where we are not purchasing the land, just the improvements on the land that are basis eligible, really helps the ability to make it financially feasible. The land costs here are extremely high. So, we wouldn't be able to be here building 154 units, expanding our portfolio, serving more affordable folks in this part of Denver. And then not to mention the incredible resources on this campus that Aaron and Anna have talked about. I can't wait to see our families out there on the campus enjoying all of the open space and amenities. We have already started talking with the other service providers that are already on the campus. The Kitchen Network is a group that Aaron mentioned. We provide services at all of our properties for our tenants, and that's an incredible opportunity right at our doorstep. There will be schools right at the doorstep, ESL programs, training opportunities. I mean, that's really a level of amenity that we could never have achieved without this model. It also secures the long-term affordability beyond our covenants. I mean, we have 60-year covenants with our funders, but this secures that through 99 years. And now we have this wonderful partnership with ULC, and we started with the hardest. This was a really challenging one just because of the complexity of the project. But we're super excited to continue to partner with ULC and other groups with this structure, since it makes a lot of projects viable. So I'll just speak briefly to some challenges. As I mentioned, I think Hannah and I always say, wow, we really started with the hardest one here. But what made it hard was not just that there's a ground lease, it was that there are multiple landowners on this site, and getting our financing partners comfortable with being not a landowner, where there are shared, Aaron mentioned a shared heat loop that multiple landowners control that system, and we are a tenant. So spending a lot of energy with our financing partners and with ULC to get our investor comfortable with some of the legal structure of this project was, it took a lot more time than we thought. And so biggest piece of advice for a complicated project like this, and really any project with a ground lease, it's a hefty document. It's a 99-year marriage, it takes a lot of time with your financing partners. So that was certainly our experience. Just start your diligence as early as you can. And, even choosing financing partners that have been through the ground lease structure before is probably immensely helpful, and making sure they're aware of the complexity of what they're bidding on when they're looking to be your financing partner. I think that's all I'll say on that piece. Certainly, it didn't scare us away, and we managed to pull off our closing just in the nick of time in 2022, and are well underway now, about halfway through our rehab. So we're really excited, and we can't wait to have families on the campus.
Great. I think Anna and Aaron, you're going to lead off here. We'll jump in.
And just a note, we are close to ready to transition, so I'm not sure how many more slides you've got. Thanks.
We
ahead,
had
Chris.
some of the questions. If we want to skip over that and go to the next presenter and then kind of come back for a QA, whatever you guys want to do.
That might actually make sense if that's all right with you. Just to have those other slides ready to go. If it comes up in the Q&A. Thank you for offering that adjustment.
Sure.
And thanks to the whole team from ULC and Archway for sharing that case study of a really dynamic and complex adaptive reuse project using some of the elements of the community land trust model. I'd love to learn more about that and dig in more to some of those details. And now I'm going to hand it off to Adam Maloon from Douglas Community Land Trust to give us a very different example of the way that the CLT model has been applied in his city of Washington, D.C. Take it away, Adam.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Are things showing appropriately? Hearing
yes,
now.
they look great.
Thank you. Sorry. Split attention. So thank you, everybody. I'm happy to be here with my colleagues from Denver, reaching out to you guys from DC or hopefully the Douglas Commonwealth one day. So my name is Adam Maloon. I work with the Douglas Community Land Trust. So we are a nonprofit membership organization that is democratically controlled and run, and centered around racial and economic equity. So from the very beginning, our team really wanted to emphasize the C in CLT, right? Big C. So emphasis on community. And as part of our startup process, we had an advisory committee that met for 2 years before we actually spun off as our own organization. And I think like 10 or 11 of the 12 folks stuck on as our governing board. And over that time really developed some expertise in this process, and I think really, really allowed us to hit the ground running. So we are a traditional community land trust, so we use a tripart board in addition to that, to our membership. The board is elected directly from the membership by the membership to be most responsive to the community. But that alone is not sufficient to be a community-led organization. My role is mostly confined to after acquisition, after properties have entered the land trust. I help I oversee the operations of the different types of properties within our portfolio. So we have a little bit, we got maybe one of everything. And we're still collecting, so that if you see something that we don't have, perhaps one day, hopefully we'll get it. But we have around 230 units, 233, in a variety of different tenure types. So most are in multifamily buildings, so that would be our limited equity housing cooperatives. We have rental, we have LIHTC rental, we have rental that's going to transition to an ownership model, likely a cooperative model. We have a couple condominium units scattered throughout the district, and then we have a third of the units in one building that are in our property, in addition to now 12 single-family homes, thanks to a recent partnership with Habitat for Humanity. We have 8 new homes, and last I heard, we had 4 under contract and probably close to maxing out there. So very excited about that. So we've acquired these through kind of a variety of means. Again, we're hoping to get one of everything too from the different acquisition sources. CLTs need to be flexible and adaptive to maximize the amount of properties that we bring into permanent affordability. And there's no permanent affordability without ongoing stewardship, right? Covenants, land leases are not self-enforcing. They are not people in their own right. We need to maintain things because the governing docs say this must be kept affordable, it also must be kept in good repair, and respond to residents as they like. So what we call stewardship, other people sometimes call technical assistance. So that generally includes things like the regular operations, right? So physical, financial, and legal, or governance of the different types of properties, right? And you can we can play out how that interacts in the different tenure types in a little bit. But everybody, there's always something to do, and there's a lot of underlying needs, right? So we're a CLT, we're not a for-profit housing provider or landlord. So we are, we try to be more responsive to residents, but we also don't come as armed with capital as other kind of folks who operate multifamily or single family homes. So there's a lot of long-term planning that needs to occur with the multifamily buildings, as well as individual residents, right? So if you have a single family home, you should be you should start to develop a maintenance plan, or at least have a schedule of things that you are keeping an eye on, if know how long the roof is set to last, check it every so often, things like that. And of course that applies in a bunch of more detailed ways to multifamily buildings. So I'm sure my colleagues are about sick of me saying this, but when working with a limited equity co-op, we are working with folks who are being asked to run a multi-million-dollar business in their spare time. So they are the ultimate decision makers on the physical asset maintenance, governance, and compliance, and the financial asset management. And that's asking a lot of anybody, but especially someone with not a lot of disposable time, and not necessarily someone whose skills line up with the needs, right? It is great when folks do, and we tap the experts in the properties. Hopefully they join the board of directors for the various resident associations. But everybody needs, there's always like one or two topics that come up every so often that needs very spot on technical expert to address those. So so developing that at development, so planning for how you're gonna manage that and how you're gonna operate is really important. And as we heard from our friends right before me, physical location can vary the type of operation significantly, right? And of course, people vary that as well. So getting to know the folks that live in your building is not just nice and good practice, but like honestly, that's where you get the most information about the properties, about their needs and wants, and so you can integrate that and adapt the operation of the buildings, right? So as early as possible, engaging with folks. I'm really happy to hear how engaged the residents in the broader community were in the highlighted development. So just checking in with what people want. I have not had any group of residents have really far out wants when asked with that question, right? Folks generally want security, comfort, and reliability. And I think a lot of times we focus on the investment, the financial, the takeaway, the equity that they develop, and when they leave the home, how much can that be? But folks, in my experience, the people who live in CLT properties view them as their homes and want to use them as such. And so that's not as high a need for a lot of people. So having discussions with people on what they want is really important, right? And of course, is that feasible? The helpful conversations that I have in kind of ferreting this out is like going to the details of like, what do you want your day-to-day look like? What do you want your month-to-month look like when you're living in this property? Do you want to be the person that tells, Mr. Francis down the hall that he really can't just put his trash outside his door? He has to put it in the big dumpster, right? Like, do you want to collect rent? No, I strongly discourage anybody from, even if they do a significant amount of their own maintenance, keep money out of it when you're dealing with your neighbors. Let somebody else handle that. And like really playing out what they want out of their homes and their community, right? Their building and what they want that to look like. Of course, this is all impacted by the constraints, right? Again, as described above, sometimes you're in a rush and you don't have time to really have the very detailed conversations, but really engaging fully when you have your permitting process that requires interaction with community members and residents, like really lean into that. Of course, location and the physical aspects of it, and the big thing obviously is funding. The different types of funds will really constrain what you can do. I'm not saying anything new, right? So once you figure out what that affordability gap between what the current rents or projected rents can cover and what is needed to handle the long-term debt coverage and operation of the building, like then you can get a little creative, right? But if you need funds, sometimes you must use tax credits like LIHTC or local or what have you. And so that's going to be a rental, at least until year 15. If you have folks that if you don't have quite that deep a gap, you can but you still have folks that can't quite qualify for their mortgages individually, and you want to collectivize that, a limited equity co-op is often a good option, right? So it's ownership control without the saddling folks with the individual responsibility. And then, of course, if folks have a little bit more money and want to use their home as a vehicle for investment in developing long-term equity, you can have kind of a condo or a co-op with a larger share price, right? There's a bunch of different varieties, but they get narrowed down pretty fast. The operations, however, can be set up to kind of cover a kind of a wide degree of things. So when we're moving to post-development stewardship, so my day-to-day, again, you got to cover all the bases, right? You have your kind of your rules set up in the governing and legal docs, and of course the loan agreement. You have your budget and finances kind of set out for you with a pro forma and that development. So you know what you're supposed to be doing, and it is now just implementing that plan. And you're also set with your partners, right? So know who to communicate with and contact with, and like really lean into that. So resident associations, management, and of course the housing operator if it's rental and is overseen by someone other than the CLT. This is not rocket surgery, right? Like the critical components in operation, in my experience, have been clear processes, having the different requirements, able to go through as streamlined a process as possible. So that's income certification, maintenance requests, and resale processing and sale. When you can stack these kinds of things as much as possible, that's great to do. We try and layer in as many municipal programs at closing. So we have an ongoing utility credit program called Community Solar for All, and we were able to negotiate with the Department of Energy and Environment out here to just say, hey, look, we are already income certifying people. Will you just accept their application and have them just note where they live instead of doing that whole process? And they're like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And so that sidesteps a huge kind of arduous process for someone, and also for the municipal government, right? Like they don't want to process the same folks for the same thing twice. And being able to just like communicate what is going on, right? So the communication of all these processes to management, to residents, and resident associations. Ideally, the resident association, be it a tenant association or a co-op board, is able to speak with the residents and then kind of feed and filter back that information up to the operators and management, and so they can address it. In my experience, management can have a difficulty shifting into the kind of culture that you want for SCLT, and bring with them sometimes kind of conflict, and don't treat residents with the amount of deference and curiosity and trust that we'd really like them to kind of connect with. And of course, the other thing is ongoing education, right? Folks are not, they don't know everything starting out with. They can learn items, and my experience is telling residents, whether they're tenants or owners, what their housing payments are used for, what happens when we don't have enough money for the development, and what happens when we have a surplus or sufficient money, really helps clarify things, and puts them in like equal partner kind of status, as opposed to just someone who is going to live in a unit and tear it apart, right? Like that's what management says about renters. They're just going to mess up the unit. So really quick, we're going to do a pop quiz. I know I'm running a little bit here, but I will run through this. And you can put in the chat, what is this tool used for? What is this tool used for? And I'm going to go through this pretty quick, so we're going to just pop on. It is important that you all, this is not and should not be construed as maintenance advice. Please consult with a subject matter expert. I am seeing some answers. So C, so that would be kitchen sink, right? C, excellent. Wonderful. You guys, we got people getting it. That is not a toilet plunger. A toilet plunger looks like what is on the screen right now. This one is for sinks and shower drains, but obviously don't mix and match. Which direction should a ceiling fan spin? And I will jump to the answer. It's obviously a trick question. It depends on what time of year it is, and if yes, thank you, Deborah. Do you want the hot air sucked up to the top, when it's cool, or do you want it pushed down to where you're enjoying it? And so the very last question is, laundry detergent is good for washing machines. Is it true or false? Jumping right through, and I apologize for not giving you enough time on this quiz. It is false. Laundry detergent gunks up washing machines. Unfortunately, it's very good for clothes, which is what you use washing machines for. So using something to clear it out, like fabric softeners, often do not work so well. They often add to the gunk, but I should say purchased ones. But something like white vinegar is a tremendous fabric softener and also clears out a lot of the gunk. You just can't put it in at the same time as the laundry detergent because of chemistry. So, I kind of bring that up to say, like, a house is a machine made for living in, right? So not only do I, like reusing graphics, but like this is a machine, and people need to be taught how to use it, and not everybody comes into it learning the ins and outs very well. And my experience has been, when you discuss this with folks, they get it. Nobody wants a maintenance guy coming in, or their perfectly good washer falling apart on them, or they are without laundry for a week or have to go across the street. So treating people as a new colleague that you're bringing on board as much as possible, and explaining the processes and explaining things to them is critical in having a good kind of ongoing stewardship process. I will now stop my presentation and pass it back to my colleagues.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks for your creative use of multiple choice questions and audio-visual, or I guess just visual cues, to help us understand all the fun, nuanced, even if they seem mundane, goings-on of doing building maintenance. But yeah, we just want to open up the opportunity here for folks to ask their questions. I know we don't have a ton of time, so while I have questions I could ask, I want to first give folks that have chosen to log on for this session an opportunity. You can feel free to unmute and ask your questions to all 5 of our panelists, or you can ask it through the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. And there was a lot of content there, so I know there's a lot to process, but I'm guessing in the processing there will be some questions. While we wait for those initial questions, maybe I'll just start by asking our presenters really quickly if there is one thing that audience members should be thinking about when it comes to incorporating components of the CLT model in their preservation development work, beyond what you've already suggested. The one takeaway, if you're considering the CLT model for doing housing preservation, or even partnering with the CLT to do housing preservation, is there one thing that you think people should know or consider? And maybe I'll start with Sarah, because I see the unmute.
Sure, I'm muted before I really thought through, but I mean, I guess I would just reiterate what Hannah and I were saying about our biggest lesson learned is just the closing process and the diligence that's required with to get through the underwriting in a project like ours. So if you're looking to do this type of structure with a CLT, and it's going to have an investor, just putting the time in upfront, working closely with those partners and the landowner to build that relationship early, start that review and diligence as early as you can will definitely benefit you in the long run. That's probably a pretty detailed response, very specific to our project, but it was definitely an important lesson for us.
No, I think that is a good lesson across the board. Due diligence takes longer than anyone hopes or anticipates, and maybe especially so if you've got complex legal documents involved or complex ownership relationships. We got a couple of additional questions in the chat, so I'm going to skip over mine. Someone asked, Claire asked, what are the most common misconceptions about land trust that you've heard in your work? So I want to open that up to Adam or ULC folks, if you have any responses to that. And then I want to get to the one that just came in about short-term, long-term considerations.
I would
But
say
first,
that
yeah, go ahead.
my answer to that one about misconceptions, it also ties back to your previous question was, I think there's no one answer. There's no one model. And I think a lot of times people in this space can get like, this is what a true community land trust is. And it's a whole spectrum. And even for ULC, our land lease looks different on every deal. So don't feel like you're stuck into a certain framework. If your project seems a little different, or maybe it doesn't, just look at all the options, and you don't have to feel like you're locked into any one framework for setting up land trust or land leases. And I just encourage going in with an open mind and keeping all options on the table.
Thank you, Aaron. And unless anyone else wants to respond to that one, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in. That CLT residents don't develop equity. Right. So if you pay down a loan, no matter what your resale formula says, you have equity in paying down the principal. And folks develop wealth through cost savings, right? And so they might use that up immediately, or maybe take less time, reduce their work hours to enjoy their life. And those are like very valuable uses of funds. And cost savings is wealth creation and is also liquid, unlike your house.
Yeah, that is a common one that we hear. There was a good question, and this is one we've gotten a lot just at Enterprise when we do technical assistance work, is trying to wrap my head around how to start from ground zero and the operational aspects of short-term / long-term things like maintenance, property management, etc. I think the question in that is sort of like, where to begin? What do you recommend for someone that's starting out and trying to figure out where to break into this model?
I think talking to someone who's been through it before probably is the best way. Obviously anyone here is happy to chat, or I think, yeah, that's the end of my sentence.
Yeah, and the things that were coming to my mind when you were asking that question, certainly the kind of just back to lessons learned, when we were building our operating budget in the early days, just thinking through, while there isn't an upfront land cost in this model for us as the developer who buying just the improvements, there's some operating costs that are unique to this type of structure that you need to be able to make sure you're building in and being thorough with the landowner in working together to understand those, so that you're sizing your loan appropriately and all of those ripple effects. So I guess going back to just broad lesson learned for us, starting early with all of these things and working closely with your CLT partner on anything that you may not be thinking about if this is your first time doing it.
And if you're looking to form a CLT, I think, please remember scale, and please remember how much operating costs. And if there is a CLT in your region, see if you can join with them in some sort of capacity, if not all the way integrated. Then as a support thing, because it's good to have cost saving, and really getting to scale is a critical project for a long-term success.
Yeah, great answers. And to the person that asked it, Steve, I'm also happy to chat with you if this is something you're considering. We've worked with a lot of land trusts around the country. There are a lot of great resources out there. Grounded Solutions Network has some great questionnaires. There are other toolkits that help you sort of consider the different factors and considerations for launching, thinking about geography, scale, property type, what your goals are for what you're trying to achieve through the model. But just putting that out there for folks that want to brainstorm that a little bit. I know we don't have a ton of time left, so I'm going to look through the chat at some of these other questions. There's one about taking advantage of Inflation Reduction Act incentives and rebates. I don't know if that's anything. I know those are very new, but if anyone has anything they want to share on that.
Yeah, we are taking advantage of those in a new development that we are developing. I don't think there's anything peculiar about matching that with a land trust or a land lease project. But a lot of those are still unfolding and rulemaking's happening with those. But there's nothing that we've seen that would preclude compatibility with those resources and land trusts.
I think if anything, some of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund programs that I've seen even include incentives for community ownership or sort of like bonus points if your project has community ownership elements. So that's worth looking at, how to be competitive. The land trust model or demonstrating some sort of shared ownership of the energy efficiency or solar or other sort of improvements that you're making to the property might actually make you more competitive for funding. But yeah, I know a lot of folks are interested in that. There was a question about braiding funds and if there are sources that you hope to access but couldn't because of eligibility constraints. And you mentioned, Catherine asked this question mentioning home. And home has actually been a focus of a lot of national CLT advocacy for a variety of reasons. I could send you, if you're interested, Catherine, a memo that was put together by a home coalition about changes that are being sought to make home more compatible with land trusts. But I'm wondering if any of the panelists have a response to that one. Sources you hope to access but couldn't because of eligibility or other constraints, and maybe like what did you do to get around those constraints?
We certainly could have used more funding sources at our project. I think that resonates with all of us. I mean, I'm not thinking of any sources that we were going after that we couldn't get because for our particular project, we definitely had some challenges with gaps and went back to our local funders. We didn't have home funds in our project, but in our case, that was not particular to the structure here. It was just the source awarded. So probably not a great answer, but always looking for more sources. I think there are, those second position loans that are out there for, Chaffa has, or with lower rates and more flexible debt coverage requirements. Those don't, sometimes the senior lender doesn't allow for that flexibility. So some of the benefits that those sources could provide are taken away slightly. So, finding, non-hard pay grant sources, cash flow loans would be great to have more of those.
Yeah, I think for the Mosaic project with ULC and Archway, it was especially unique in the opposite direction where, I mean, even the historic preservation tax credits required agreements and consent on so many other parties and on land that was not part of their development. And so I would just point back to just having really good relationships with your partners. It takes time to build that trust. And for as much technical expertise as you may have and acumen on these, a lot of success is dependent on the time that you put into building relationships with your partners, both funding and people you're doing the project with. Probably should go without saying, but I just, this project just emphasizes that all that much more.
I'd really like to be able to use the HUD insured commercial loans a little bit more if they were a little bit easier to qualify for. Including bringing back the old co-op HUD insured program. And then also just like any mortgage. We have a nice collection of lenders who are open to us, but man, it's really frustrating to get a response saying, hey, these don't meet Fannie Mae guidelines. I'm like, I'm going to send you a bunch of them. And yes, you can use it on desktop underwriter too. And they just don't approve it initially. So it takes advocacy, you can do it.
Thank you. Well, these are great answers. They kind of speak to the complexity and sort of structural challenges of financing the CLT model that we're all hoping to and trying to address at various levels. Actually, I know we're about to run out of time, but on this note, Maggie asked a good question. If you could wave your magic wand and change one policy component to make your work easier, what change would you make? And Adam, you already have TOPA, so a lot of folks on this call are jealous of something like that, a right of first offer, a right of first refusal. But what else is out there? Or if it's not one change, if you could wave a magic wand and just do something that would make things easier.
I guess I can speak to this from a more procedural perspective. And in Colorado, they've been trying to fix this, and I'm sure they have elsewhere, but the streamlining processes with local jurisdictions to just make things happen. It has been particularly painful to get anything across the finish line. So that if I had that magic wand, that would be my wish.
Yeah, property taxes that are for land banking. I mean, just if I had a wand, that's how I'd use it.
Having a reliable maintenance request thing for residents that is trackable, because it's mostly a phone, just calling someone, and that is not easy to follow up on.
Adam, that one feels achievable. Perhaps some kind of program software.
You'd think so. You really would.
Sarah has a good contribution in the chat. I would wave a magic wand to make appraisers become not confused about appraising land with covenants. That would be helpful. And Aaron, to your point, and this is something maybe I don't know if people are aware of, but could be of interest to folks in Colorado doing policy advocacy. California actually finally did pass a law, I believe, a couple of years ago that extended the welfare exemption privileges to land trusts that held land that was intended to be developed for housing. So there was already some property tax exemptions for affordable rental housing, and then deed restricted home ownership is more complicated. But this bill specifically addressed the sort of pre-development acquisition holding period. Maybe there's a way to try to do something like that in Colorado.
Yeah, and there was a legislation passed in the last session that gets to that, but it's a very narrow. Yeah, it's going to take some finesse to access it.
And go ahead, Adam.
I was just gonna say we're very reasonable people, and these things should be achievable. But
you would think. Well, I know we're over time. Thank you so much to all the panelists and all the questions. These are some really good questions. I hope we got to all of them. And the ones that we didn't get to, maybe we can continue the conversation, or feel free to follow up via email. I think Sarah is gonna maybe share some closing
Yeah, well,
Tom?
we're at time, so we can go ahead and just thank everyone so much for your presentations, your participation, all the great questions. You will see in your emails a link to a very quick survey. Would love for all participants just to fill that out for us to help inform future planning and how we can continue to make this as useful and impactful for everyone as possible. So a huge thank you, and thank you to James for your curating the event today. Thanks all. Have a great afternoon.